It was in a bag with a bunch of cut stamps that he had ripped off envelopes and just thrown in a bag. And at the bottom of the bag,
We're live.
We're live, but we're short.
Stacy's not here. Yeah. He sent it an email.
Okay. Oh, I didn't get. He's not coming.
No.
Oh, I didn't get the email.
He sent you. Yeah, he sent you an email.
No, I didn't. I've been.
So I don't get the paper email.
Yeah. Well, no, I haven't. I had a cat go to the vet today, and I've been dealing with some stuff at home, so I haven't. So, what is his reason for not coming?
He had a previous
He doesn't
engagement.
really
Yeah.
detail, did it?
He didn't detail it. He was just saying he was just asking for an excused absence. So.
We'll tell him there's no excuse for him.
Should over well.
Yeah, I think that's probably not a good idea.
Well done. All right. Well, I guess we're ready to go. It's 6:32. You guys ready?
Oh, Lloyd's.
Oh, where is Lloyd?
He's back there.
Oh.
Rain.
Yeah, let me turn my devices down and off and all that sort of thing.
Glad I brought an umbrella. Doing that when we get out.
It's rare to email like pictures of basic plans.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sit down in the hole.
Graphics to it.
That's better.
All right. Quick drink here, guys, and we'll get going. All right. I'd like to call to order the Holly Township Planning Commission for April 3rd, 2018 at 6:32 p.m. We all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
and liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Oh, I know, we're going to float away tonight.
Hopefully we have Noah's Ark on standby. Can I get a roll call, please? Here.
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 Can I get a motion to excuse both Ted and AC?
Support.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Mitchell, support by Ms. Steckley. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hearing no opposed, motion carries. Approval of the agenda? Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Ms. Steckley, support by Mr. Mitchell to approve the agenda as written. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hearing no opposed, the motion carries. Public comment for items on the agenda only. If anybody has anything they'd like to say about what we've got going on tonight, stand up and state your name for the record. Anybody? Tough crowd tonight. Okay, hearing none. Public hearing, Chapter 32 zoning, Article 14 supplementary regulations for solar energy systems regulation ordinance. Can I get a motion to open public hearing?
So moved.
Support.
Okay, motion by Mr. Kernan, support by Ms. Steckley. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hearing none opposed, motion carries. Mike?
I'm going to stand up so people at home can hear me.
Okay.
All right. So what we're talking about today is a solar energy ordinance for the township. The ordinance identifies essentially three types of solar energy facilities. We have direct use, which is intended for creating energy for on-site usage. So for your single-family home, if you want to have solar-mounted, or rooftop-mounted, not solar-mounted, rooftop-mounted solar panels or ground-mounted solar panels, that would fall under the direct use. Then we have two categories, primary use and secondary use, and those are for generation of power primarily off-site. And the difference between the two relate to the amount of property being used. So if the majority of the property is being used solely for generation off-site, it would fall under primary. and if it's less than 50%, it would fall under secondary. So for your direct use, those are going to be treated as principal permitted uses. So those do not need approval from the Planning Commission or site plan approval. The primary and secondary uses are treated generally as special land uses. The secondary use, if it is in an industrial zoning district, it would require just site plan approval from the Planning Commission. Otherwise, it would require special land use. So that would allow it in the residential zoning districts as special land uses. So we've gone and identified the standards that you would use to review these. So first we look at setbacks. So for your direct use, they have to meet the setbacks of the zoning district, right? Essentially, you're treating them as an accessory structure. So that they meet the front yard, your side, and rear. For the primary and secondary uses, they have a minimum setbacks of 75 feet. For height limits, the maximum height for a ground mounted is 15 feet, and roof mounted would be 5 feet above the roof. I think I mentioned this last time we talked about this. I was in Williamstown Township, which is just outside of East Lansing, and we had a similar ordinance for them, and we had a packed house, and a lot of them were professors from SU providing additional input for the ordinance, and based on that, 15 feet was decided to be an acceptable height for ground mounted. So a building permit will be required for these, right, because there is electrical involved with it. Supplemental information required. So as part of the application for your building permit with the township, we need to have the manufacturer's installations and appropriate warnings information. So essentially what happens is when they come in for the application, there is a booklet essentially that the manufacturer has that needs to be as part of their application for a building permit, because that contains the manufacturer's suggested installation process, the whatever warnings that are necessary, and all the important information you need to make an accurate review of the project. So also on here we have glare avoidance. Now I know we had some comments about glare last time. I looked at how glare is addressed in other sections of the zoning ordinance for Holly, and it's very similar to the language that's here. So I know it's not very technical. It's more of if it's a problem, we'll deal with it. But it's consistent with the other sections of the zoning ordinance. We also require septic system avoidance. We don't want solar panels going over septic fields. Same with floodplain. We have an abandonment section in here. So that states that if the solar energy facility ceases to produce energy for continuous basis for 12 months, it would be considered abandoned, and then they have a process that they have to remove it. This is consistent with the non-conforming use section of the zoning ordinance with the 12 months. And again, it's to prevent just having derelict and outdated infrastructure just sitting out there, right? So help maintain the character of the township. So then when we look at the individual requirements for the direct use, we have the general requirements. We talk about the lot coverage, which is going to be governed by the zoning district. Your setbacks, again, governed by the zoning district. Height limits, we talked about the 15 feet and 5 feet above the roof. And floodplain avoidance. So again, the idea is that this is being treated similar to your accessory uses within the district. Not trying to recreate additional standards for people who are trying to do it on their own property. I think our main concern is for the large-scale projects. So when we start looking at the solar energy facilities' primary and secondary uses, as we mentioned, we're treating them as a special land use. We identify the which classification is by the amount of lot coverage. So if it's over 50%, it would be considered a primary. If it's under 50%, it would be considered a secondary. We also have a note in here that the Michigan Farmland Preservation Program, these types of uses would not be allowed on those properties, right? Because those are intended to be preserving farmland within the state, and by doing the solar energy facilities, you're no longer meeting those goals. There is a process to withdraw yourself through the program. There's repayment that has to occur, and if someone goes through that process, then they would be eligible, but otherwise, they would not be. We also talk about grading, again, to make sure, consider about stormwater and runoff and erosion. We do have a whole section in here about soil erosion and soil stabilization. As part of that plan, there has to be ground cover, ideally with a native Michigan ground cover of some sort. Now for just the special land use, we have a section on visibility. And we may want to talk about that in depth in a second. But for these special land uses, if they are located in a residential area, they shall have a minimum landscape buffer of 25 feet. That buffer shall contain evergreens, bushes planted no more than 8 feet apart and at least 4 feet tall at the time of plantings. And so, the goal of the buffer zone is, again, to protect the visual impact that a large-scale use would have on the character of the township. This ordinance as a whole was created looking at best practices all over the country, and this is a consistent requirement that you see for the solar energy facilities large scale. Whether it's North Carolina, Colorado, or California, and other Michigan communities, this is a common requirement. Now, we don't have this requirement in this ordinance for the direct use, so for the individual properties. This may be something we want to discuss a little bit to see if we want to require screening if it's visible from the adjacent properties or not. So we also talk about locations where they are allowed and not allowed. So we have identified protected lands, and these are floodways, wetlands, wetland transition areas, open water, properties enrolled in the Michigan Farmland Preservation Program, habitat of special status for threatened, endangered, or candidate or fully protected species, and then lands within easements where solar energy facilities are prohibited. So under protected lands, these types of uses would not be allowed. Now, the majority of property within the township are outside of these, but again, it's important to be able to protect what we have in the township when we look at these types of developments. The last large section in here is the decommission plan, and that's going to be a requirement for the large-scale projects. We also, in here, require a bond as part of that. One of the things we talked about during the cell tower discussion was decommissioning. If the technology is no longer, it becomes obsolete, what do you do with the existing structure? Well, we have the whole requirements for the plan in here, and this is what they have to tell us how they're going to do it, and language for the bond. So this is the ordinance that we're proposing for tonight. We're looking for a recommendation to the Township Board. I think that we had a brief discussion last time, and I tried to address some of those comments. If we want to discuss a little bit more about the buffer or whatever questions you have, I am here to answer them tonight.
Members of the board, we'll take him up on that when we get to old business. For now, is there any members of the public who wish to speak on this? Hearing none, can I get a motion to close public hearing?
So moved.
Support?
Support.
Okay, I have a motion by Lloyd, support by Stacy to close the public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hearing none opposed, motion carries. Okay, approval of the minutes for March 6, 2018. Any questions, comments, corrections? only thing I might say under others present, because she's a government official, is that we should probably put Katie Hughes in under the others present section on the front page, because she was here on behalf of the Village of Holly.
I think normally it's just.
Is it just?
He's the only extra they've ever had yet.
Oh, really? Okay.
I mean, I can ask her.
But again, she's actually written in as speaking.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So
That's
it
true.
does show up that way.
Okay. Well, can I get a motion then to approve the minutes?
So
moved.
moved.
So move.
Support.
Okay. I have a motion by Glenn, support by Stacy to approve the minutes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Okay, we have no communications tonight, so we will go into old business item number 1, solar energy. I've got one quick question, and then I will toss it around the board, and we'll see where this goes. I think it was under the decommission. There we go. Well, my question, I can, without even finding it, my question was, there's a wording in there that, under of a position called the planning director. I don't know that we don't have one of those, at least not as that's currently constituted. Thank you. And so along with that, my question under section J, letter A, who polices, I guess, whether or not a facility is being used for 12 months or not used for 12 months? How do we, since I know the question of enforcement always comes up with these things, how do we do that?
So how or who?
Both.
Okay. Well, the how, it's
The panels are sitting there, how would we know?
Yeah, how do you
You
tell?
know, do we train somebody to be able to tell? I mean, they're sitting there, they're
But
sitting
isn't the
there.
reality the only time this is a problem if it becomes an eyesore or there's somebody who complains about it, basically, right?
Right.
Well, wouldn't the energy company be able to register whether or
Yeah,
not?
is there a mechanism for us
But you
to
wouldn't
keep?
necessarily always sell to that.
Yeah.
Is the
Right.
Yeah.
issue, Could be.
Could be.
Could be proof.
Or would it just behoove us to have it, like you say, if it reaches a point where you would question because of the way it looks, or, something changed that, doesn't meet what it was built for? Would that be, I don't know how you would word that in there, but would you
Wouldn't
put
that start
something
the
in
clock
there
ticking
to?
at that point that they'd have to prove at some point that.
Yeah, it's like, okay, it looks in
But basically,
disarray, you
a year
prove to
from when
us that
somebody
it's been working.
gave warning or something.
Right.
Probably.
I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Yeah, the rain
Oh,
is.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What I was saying was is there anything we could put in there, or a section that would state that, if it, by inspection we saw something that, okay, it's either been altered or it's not in the condition in which it was, approved for. So in other words, if we all of a sudden we find a pile of solar panel sitting on the property, disconnect it, we can say, well, you're obviously not meeting your,
Right.
what it was used for. But just looking at it, I think you kind of have to go on their goodwill there, because I don't know how you would really prove one way or the other.
Well, so part of the decommission plan is that the township is granted the right of entry on the site pursuant to reasonable notice to effect or complete decommissioning. So you would have the right to enter the site with reasonable notice to determine if it's still properly functioning.
Can we
I think-
ask for records at that point if there's a question? I'm assuming the solar panel owners are going to keep records of where that energy is going.
Correct.
So the township can at that point demand, for them to produce.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I mean, it's, by the point you're inspecting, there's obviously something
Reason.
that's perked your, interest when you're looking at the property. And I think it's like anything else, it's for them to prove that they're meeting what they're, the site meets requirements.
Who's the person that would make that visit? Do we have an inspector that
Well,
qualified to do that?
So, I suppose it would be the building official would probably be the most knowledgeable person. I mean, unless you want to go out there and.
No, I would agree. It would probably be either the building inspector or the electrical inspector.
Right. You know, so one of the they're pulling permits, right? So you have multiple hammers in this situation. One, the zoning ordinance and the Michigan Building Code. So the building official would be the most knowledgeable person to go out there.
Once again, it's one of those things, no pun intended, but the light goes on, you do have electrical, and they would be able to see that's true if you had them inspecting it.
Right.
You know, obviously, this isn't hooked up to anything.
Correct.
You know.
And then there's other site, if the site starts looking ratty and overgrown with weeds, the other visual indicators that you typically have, when a property is vacant, that you can, follow through on those procedures.
So our normal light rules would fall under the same thing?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So
Yep.
So if we take out the words planning director from that section, we gotta,
We say township official.
that would make sense. That would give us some flexibility depending on who we've got trained.
Right. It doesn't limit you to a certain person.
Glenn, I saw you scribbling a bunch of notes.
I always do that.
Yeah, exactly. So,
So you started with me again.
yes.
Okay, the thing I have an issue with, I should have mentioned last meeting, but it was going on pretty late. It seems to me an ideal place for this is actually, oh, you want to hear me? True. Is floodplains. That's an area where you can't use for hardly anything else. It could be used, true wetlands probably is not stable enough to attach things, but floodplains a lot of times are stable most of the year. Seem like that would be a natural place to use that, and I don't see why that would be excluded. And you have both places, I think, as being excluded. So I just make that comment. I don't know anybody's going to want to put on a floodplain, but it seemed like a useful use of a floodplain area. Of course, my thing is, which has nothing to do with this, is I think along expressways is an ideal place for those, but that's not where they're going to use those. Not on private land, but on expressway edgeways where you can't plant trees of anyway. Also, the PA 116, which I'm aware of, it seems like we shouldn't really need anything in the ordinance for this. If PA 116 forbids it, they're going to know that or have that problem with PA 116. I think Farm Bureau is actually working in the way to actually get it so it would be a permitted use on PA 116. I'm not sure what status that is at this point. So those are probably my biggest comments. I did have, and I think I did mention before, it really don't have any major thing, but the planting things around it for visibility. When you put 10 foot around it, you start to pretty close to getting where you're actually limiting what the solar benefit's going to be. I just wonder if that's actually taller than really necessary. It seems like more of a 6 foot hedge, and not to even mention trees, because if you put trees around it before long, if it's very close, they're not going to get much use of solar, the solar effect. And that's, I can't remember where that's at now, but it was in here. And even over septic fields, I understand you probably don't want to cover them up because of the actual maintenance issue. But again, that's an area where you shouldn't be growing trees or anything. It would seem like a natural area where it would make it useful of just an open area anywhere your septic tank is. So I'm not sure if it's that valuable to actually forbid the use over that, other than to warn people that it might be something they would have to take out to replace their septic field or something like that. So that was my comments, I think, on the...
So, how about I start on the easy one? So from the landscape buffer,
Yep.
I understand, 10 feet tall. I think the idea is that that's going to be closer to the road.
Yeah, so visibility, right. So you don't see the thing.
So,
I understand that.
So,
yeah.
The panels will be further back, so the trees themselves wouldn't be blocking,
Yep.
their production.
I understand, but 10 foot seemed like a little on the higher side, but and it doesn't say it, doesn't it? Well, I don't know. I don't see where it's at even on here. I saw it a few minutes ago.
So page 6.
Page 6.
Is that also to help with the glare issues?
Just so it looks better probably from a distance. Yeah. I understand that part of it, but just seemed like that might have been a little higher than.
I mean, really,
it's
there's
nitpicking.
10 and 8. If you want to say 8, we can.
Yeah, well, I'm just
do that.
yeah. And to me, I like to see less on the regulation side, so I would just say planting a berm and leave it at that, or something that.
So what's nice is you do have the ability to waive it. Right.
Okay, with the site plan, yeah.
Right. So they have to come in with the site plan, special land use for you guys
Okay.
to review. So you can look at the site conditions and you can determine. Nobody can see this from anywhere. Why are we going to make them do that? They don't need to. Or a berm is appropriate due to the topography or the site and location of adjacent properties. So it's intended to give you that flexibility, but to offer, this is the starting point. And then if they want to do something different, you guys have the ability to approve that.
Okay. That was the easy part. You said there was a harder part.
Well, so the question about the floodways and the septic, I've always been taught nothing on top of the septic system.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's just for practical reasons. If you have to replace it,
Right.
it would be a barrier for that. So.
It can also cause complications with financing for you, with something. A lot of banks have a problem when you have anything that's in your drain field. So
I would think too that a company, if they're going to go on the property, put something in that there's if it's private, they're going to say any kind of warranty. Well, you know what? You're putting on top of a septic field. You might void the warranty. If someone's doing it commercially, they're going to say, we don't want to put our equipment on top of something that you would have the right to dig up on us. That would be.
I don't necessarily disagree that much with that one, but it just seemed like that also is an open area that's not being used. It seemed like it would just make sense. It could be used for that without really a major problem.
But the flood.
Not over the septic tank itself, perhaps, but over the field part, because that could be quite a large area.
The floodplain, though, that one I was wondering, is that a case of what they're worried about if the equipment gets washed away, or is that a pollution? I mean, what's the point in the floodplain?
I think there's multiple reasons. I'm not entirely sure that you can under the building code build in the floodplain, and I can definitely double check.
So they
that.
treat it as a structure, so that's
Correct.
No.
So from that in and of itself, so I don't suppose this is really going to affect the flow of water. But again, the concerns that you have on soil erosion and soil stabilization. The floodplain is what it is, right? So it's intended that this is where the 100-year storm is going to go. This is where the water is going to go, and then you introduce your electrical components.
Water and electricity don't mix.
So again, right, when I was doing my review, that was a condition that was over and over again, identifying the best practices. So, that's why it ended up in there.
Stacy?
I'm fine with it as it stands.
Lloyd?
Just a question on the ground mounts. Will they have to be fenced? Or should they be fenced just to keep people away from them? There's electricity in there. People go in there and
No more
start.
than anything else, I don't think. It's not really. Any electricity is going to be through wiring that you would have access to. It's not like there's going to be.
Well, you're thinking, what was it, the cell tower that we made them put a fence around?
Yeah. Same kind of thing.
Well, that was a little bit different because that was a cell on wheels, right? So that wasn't your typical cell tower.
Right.
That has the guy wires and it's the generator there, So that was a little bit different situation than that.
You're also talking about people climbing at heights on it. That's something like this. You're not talking about heights or
Right.
of that nature.
Again, it seems most communities are treating these as like accessory structures, right? And so you don't typically require fencing for accessory structures.
Well, it seems there's some danger factor there because there is electricity being generated. Can someone get in there and climb up and get to that? Not that you'd want to, but people do crazy things. We see it every day. So, just a thought. And the other one's on the bond. Is that going to be priced at today's numbers, or 15 years from now when they'll start to be shutting
Are
down?
they renewable, or how does that?
I mean, it should grow over time because the cost to do it's going to grow.
So it does contain a replenishment obligation. It may be best to have the township attorney review that specific section so that it is consistent with other bond requirements in the township.
This at least $250,000 bond. What kind of pricing? Do you know what it would end up costing a person to get this kind of bond or something like this? Is that something that's readily available even? I think that's probably important. That's what my worry is, that as time changes and people change, these solar facilities may become obsolete, or And
Right.
the easiest thing is just abandon it and leave it for somebody else to take care of. So I do agree there should be something like this. I just wonder what the kind of cost would be on the individual on that, or if it's we
So,
know.
as part of the special land use, the decommission plan is part of it, and then the engineer estimates for what that decommission cost will be.
So that would
One.
determine the cost more than okay. So there's no okay.
I know we had trouble with the gravel pits about decommissioning those, and the bonds weren't even close to being sufficient. And that happened years and years ago, but we could look at the same thing here, because these will start decommissioning at some point in the future, 10, 15, 20 years.
I think that's probably the biggest issue I have with these, as far as I think they're a great idea or whatever, but at some point things become obsolete, and then
Yeah.
it's getting rid of them, and what it's, the person can be responsible enough to
Agree.
take them
No, I
out
agree.
once they're.
That's what we had when we had a special land use for a cell tower about a year ago, and that was something I was strongly for, because cell service eventually is going to be satellite and other things. So, is there a way you can do the bonds where they're reviewed every 10 years, every 20 years, so that if costs, I mean, the reality is, meanwhile, the township will have that money sitting in a bank account somewhere earning some kind of interest, which would
So
offset
I guess
some of
my
that, but-
recommendation would be to talk with the township attorney.
Okay.
Right? And
Wouldn't it be also one of the things like blight type things? Couldn't they actually, the township, take it down and basically charge it to the homeowner and add it on their taxes?
Taxes, yeah.
So the bond wouldn't be the only possible way. This would just be the most visible, where you could get it quicker, probably.
That's all I have.
Well, I went to a solar conference, and of course, got full of all the different ideas in it. I just had a couple of questions. One on configuration. Does this cover anything on configuration? Because when we were at that solar thing, they were showing all different kinds of ways that the solar panels could be set up on a piece of property. And I'm thinking, are we looking at it from our point of view? We want to, keep it within context of the community. Does this limit to how they can configure it? I mean, I'm reading it, but I'm like, am I missing anything on that?
I wouldn't.
Do you think the height thing does that trick on that to make sure that because they were showing pictures of farmland with some pretty wild,
Yes.
checkerboard-looking
No,
ones, and
Probably
I think
tiered,
that
perhaps,
that
tier, yeah. And it's
the
like,
biggest visual impact you're going to have is from the height, right? The stuff that's on the buildings, you see that right now,
Right.
And I don't think anyone has any large outcry against it.
Mhm.
Limited it to 15 feet, again, you're treating it similar to accessory structures. You can have a shed that tall, or
Right. Now, when you talk 15 feet, is that from the ground? Strictly from the ground, right? Because
Correct.
that's what I was going to say. They were showing tiers that they had
Yeah.
built up, and I'm like, wow, thinking, well, yeah, but my, mound of dirt was so high over that one, and but it would be from like one set point on the ground. And what's the other one? On the, this was something that's, I don't know, it's not. How often do you see for lack of a better term, old guard energy companies bringing in equipment to harvest the energy from solar fields? Is that a problem? Putting towers in to extract from like a commercial site. Does that happen that often, or is that something that's rare that we
So-
see?
right now what they're looking for is where there's existing infrastructure, right? So they look for existing transmission lines,
Okay. So
minimum of 60 acres within X amount of feet within those transmission lines. I don't know that it's going to be economically feasible to extend the transmission lines in that manner.
it would have to be some large project for them to do that.
Right.
You wouldn't see that in like a place like Cali, most likely.
No,
because
because you guys already have efficient infrastructure, transmission lines where they can tap into.
Because I did hear that from some of the outer lying areas of the state, and people were saying, "Oh, this is fantastic," but just remember when you start getting, you have to sell it to somebody.
Right.
And when these, and I said, "Oh yes, we know how consumers can come in and do what they want." And they said,
Right. But,
you gotta remember if the community wants to see that or not.
At the end of the day, you guys are still in Oakland County, right? You do have infrastructure that you don't have up in Satellite County
Right.
or up near Bad Axe.
And I was thinking at the time, I thought, well, we probably couldn't see a project that size that they would need to change that, you know.
Right.
That's about all I had.
Well, what's the board's pleasure tonight?
So I have noted on here 2 things,
Okay.
or 3 things. 1, reducing the trees for the visibility on page 6 from 10 to 8 feet. Then on page 7, changing planning director to township official.
Yep.
And then have the township attorney review the bonding requirements of the decommissioning plan.
Did we want to look at the screening for the direct use from adjacent properties?
I don't want to, but
I actually don't want to either. I think that we shouldn't put any more restrictions on it, but that is something that Mike mentioned.
Yeah,
We
you
may
know,
wanna
I think
discuss.
originally my thought was you should, but the more I've thought about it, you know, I keep on saying it's like an accessory building. It's like this is
Yeah.
an accessory structure.
Yeah.
You don't have those screening requirements for a shed.
And for
You know-
existing houses, you're most likely not going to have that many panels, or they're going to be incorporated into the house or
Right.
building itself. I mean, it's very few, I think, you're going to actually see down on the ground.
And again, right, this is a living document. If this happens and you do get a couple situations, you can come in and change the ordinance pretty quick before it becomes a huge problem. Obviously, whoever puts it up, they're grandfathered in, but still, you know, you do have mechanisms to address this.
Now, would it be the place of the township board to place the monitor value on the bond?
So again, I think that's part of the recommendation of the attorney. Whatever the attorney recommends is
Right.
the direction you guys should go.
I mean, we don't need to set an amount, say that's absolutely it here. It can be done.
No, we can just say that there has to be a bond,
Right,
and then the
right.
board can determine what that is. I think that's what happened with the cell tower.
I think we were kind of on, that's why I was thinking
Yeah.
about it. I was trying to remember back if we were on agreement and the board said, yeah, that sounds
Yeah, I
good
think
to
I
us
think
too,
we
you know,
recommended whatever the amount was, but
Yeah.
then ultimately the board would have the ability to change or adjust that to. Are we all comfortable with the glare? Any glare questions?
it's going to be hard to say you're going to have no glare, but
Right.
I assume you still want it minimal, so I just thought it should say minimal instead of no glare or whatever. With must not produce glare is, I think, almost unable to. Somewhere it's going to be glare, whether you're above it or beside it. So I just thought it should be minimal
Yeah,
glare or
that
something.
might
And
save
again,
us.
it's all relative to who you are, what you
Right.
consider
Well,
glare.
that might
to.
save us from some arguments later on if we say minimal
Yeah.
instead of none. Because if you say none, someone comes in and
It's
says,
really
well,
hard
I got
to-
some. It's like, you
Yeah,
know,
if you're the neighbor that doesn't like it, you're going to say, well, that glare is just
Right, right.
unbearable.
yeah, I would probably say just minimal. That way, you know, it gives you
Which
some
would
leeway.
that would give us some site plan review flexibility too,
Right,
if
right,
legitimately that we could see there being a problem with a neighbor or a different structure, that we have some mechanism to encourage them to re-examine how they're doing things.
I don't see where the PA 116 is in there, but it just seemed like we should leave that out and let the state regulate that instead of having to put something else in here about it.
So it's been my
That could
understanding
change.
that the PA 116 has been renamed to the Michigan Farmland Preservation Program.
That's what's always been called Michigan or Farmland Preservation Act.
So I don't think they call it PA 116 anymore.
No, they
No,
don't.
it's-
Because
what's
when you were
the-
saying that, I didn't hear any of that
No.
up at the thing. And I was trying to connect
Still,
it. It's
still
like-
the law is under
The
PA
law,
116. That's where
right,
it came from.
right.
So.
When you were saying that, I didn't hear that up at the conference, and I was like, okay, I haven't heard that one. I did hear something.
Farmers do object to using the word farm after this solar thing because that's not truly a farm,
Farm,
and so
right.
it kind of misuse of that term. Along with
Right.
subdivisions that use the word farm, I object to. So
Is there consensus to remove the Michigan Farmland Preservation Program from this?
because they have their own rules of what can and can't use in that property,
so
and
they're
they
gonna
should
be-
be people aware of
They're,
that.
the bottom line is they're going to be bound by that, whether
Whether we have it in
Yeah.
here or not. So
Right.
that's,
so it'll streamline the ordinance a little bit.
Yeah. less is always better in these ordinances.
The question, you do have the ability to say that if it is in there and that it's not, regardless of what the program says. I think that it's easier, like Len says, if it just matches what state law says.
But that changes over time, and that's
So could
what
we
this
have it
one-
right in here, subject to
I,
It already is.
It's, if you, just if you want to make a mention of it without,
There aren't going to be many people in Holly that would in the Farmland Preservation Act,
right.
except for me. So, don't think there's might be one or two others, not many.
I'd wonder when you have language like that in there, that if someone just said, well, okay, I want to go by their rules and not your rules down the line, and if they're different, they alter theirs anytime and it's in conflict with ours. If someone doesn't like that, then, but it's also in your rules that you accept those rules. So,
Right.
kind of one of those, we have control over ours, we don't have control over what they do. So if they amend theirs somewhere down the line, we don't know about it, someone gets a hold of it and says, look, I want to follow their rules and not yours. That's probably out there, but it's a possibility.
Well, would somebody like to make a motion?
I have one more question on
Sure.
the bond. In page 6, paragraph E, it does say $250,000
Yep.
for a bond.
Says minimum, doesn't it?
Minimum.
At least. Yeah,
Yeah.
at
Which
least.
Right,
seems like
so-
a lot for a residential, or a small operation.
this is only for the special land use
Okay.
for the primary and secondary use.
So let's review that again. So as a homeowner, I could actually put in a small scale thing. I just couldn't put a large scale in it. Is that correct?
Once the primary purpose is for sale off-site,
Okay.
then that's when you fall into the classification of the special land use.
Does that
So
say
it's-
that someplace in here actually, or it might very well? I read it through. I just remember noticing
I
that.
think it does.
I think so. There was a distinction between residential, they don't have
Okay.
to do,
I remember talking about it. I just
Yeah,
didn't
so
remember noticing it.
direct use is a solar energy facility designed and installed to provide on-site energy demand for any legally established use of property. Primary use is a solar energy facility that uses over 50% of the parcel and is devoted to electric power generation, primary for off-site use. And then secondary is 50%, less than 50% of the property.
Okay. I'm worried about that.
I went right by that, didn't realize that.
That's the very beginning. That's the definition,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really tie it to who has to have permits. Is I guess my thing was
I just saw that.
So then under permanent
uses allowed. Is that where it comes back to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that calls for a bond, but it doesn't call for it to grow over time as expenses grow over time. So we're going to have the attorney look at that,
Correct.
Pat just found here too on page 5 where it talks about fencing and barriers. It must be enclosed by a fence, barrier, barbed wire, other appropriate means.
where are you looking?
Page 5 at the top, paragraph 4,
Oh, yeah.
Roman numeral 4.
That covers just about everything.
Yeah, even a security guard.
Yeah, security.
Oh, yeah, they're-
Video surveillance.
Well,
I-
if we leave it in there, we have the ability to waive it, correct? If it doesn't
Right.
make sense to,
Which section are we looking at here?
page 5,
The
right
top.
at the top, section 4.
4,
Or-
top. Roman numeral 4.
Oh.
All right, I think
It's
you're
gonna be
looking
under
Well,
H.
I would think you'd have
older
Part of
version?
visibility.
Pardon me?
Yes, is the old version. Yeah, I'm looking at it. What happened? Is the one with the minutes or with the today's packet, was that changed then somewhat?
Yeah, so the packet that you were originally sent
that's
was
right.
the old
Yeah, I'm looking
version
at
of
my
the
old
ordinance
versions.
that was at the last meeting,
Oh, okay. So
and
that was-
I
yeah.
had given,
Yep,
I emailed it to Karen
That's
like,
right.
literally like 2 minutes after she sent it out.
yep, that's right, we got that.
But that was
So what do we
this.
have here?
That's good.
Yeah.
No, that was a flyer. I printed that.
Okay.
So the one we
That
got in our
wasn't
envelope,
an ordinance,
our
that was a
packet, is the
flyer.
correct one?
No, it should have been emailed to you. Well,
Well,
honestly,
we received a flyer and an email
I got it
a
in the
few
mail.
minutes after the
Okay.
packet email was sent,
so I don't know if it was
because I actually printed
put,
that.
Okay, so
mailed,
that's-
what was mailed to you guys.
So you're not seeing that in the one you have?
Well, so you're saying it's under section 4?
4.
It's
Uh,
under
Roman-
H.
H under
and then
visibility
Roman numeral number
in the
4.
last thing under H.
Under B.
It's still there on the part that was emailed to
Yeah.
us. Yeah. I have it on my phone.
You find it?
When I looked over that earlier, when you said that, I remember something about videos. That's why I remembered it.
Mhm.
In there somewhere.
Yeah, I read it, but I didn't
It's like,
remember that.
Yeah, so that's for the special land use. You guys have the ability to waive that
Okay,
based on the site conditions.
okay.
That is not for the direct use for the single family home.
Right, right.
Right,
Just Lloyd's concern was if he had something that was I'm thinking fairly good size one, you probably would want to have, whoever was installing would want to have some kind of barrier or something
Mhm.
too, not just
I would
us,
think.
you know, it's like.
Right.
So this gives you the flexibility to require that on the special land use.
okay.
Interesting, in the email, it was page 4 was missing. I didn't realize it. I was looking like, I was trying to figure out where H was. There's no H on page 4.
Any further discussion?
Well, do we need to see the final version?
I would not think we would, wouldn't we?
We're not seeing that right now, it sounds like.
'Cause there's at least 3.
Well, you could pass along to the board what the changes made that we just discussed, or if you want to see it again, I guess we couldn't wait till next month to do it again, but
So
it's been done both ways before. We've done
So
it
were you doing
where-
other changes besides the height, the tree height, and the
Changing
township
the-
official?
Yeah.
So
Perfect.
also glare
The glare,
Okay.
Right,
has been changed from not produce glare to produce minimal glare,
minimum, right.
and then visibility, right? We reduce those to 8 feet tall. Township official from planning director, and have the attorney review the decommission plan specifically regarding the bond.
Can we say specifically for inflation of the bond?
For that, review that entire section
Okay.
based on their recommendation.
So you didn't want to take out the farmland preservation program portion of it then?
Well, what's the consensus? I think, I'm inclined.
Again, I
it's
think the
kinda one
state
of
law
those-
already generates that, and if it changes, then our wouldn't necessarily match it, is I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't think we
I
need
mean,
that.
aren't most of our ordinance based on, you know, that will be in compliance with the state or will follow the state anyway, so.
Right, and the intent is to allow it on those types of properties otherwise, so if the state would allow it, then I don't see a reason why the township shouldn't allow it.
Mhm.
So then that'll be removed from solar energy facilities, primary and secondary uses, where they're not allowed, and then on protected lands, they'll be removed from that section also.
Are there any other changes in that new document from what we have? I mean, anything major?
So the main change is that the visibility standards were originally on both sections, which included the direct use, and I knew that was not what you guys wanted, so that was pulled out.
Mhm.
So, and then the decommission plan was also could be read that it was for both sections. It's specifically only in the special land use section now.
Because again, the blight ordinances would take care of direct use if the stuff was left overgrown.
I would think we could make a motion to move it on to the township
'Cause we
board with the
With these
changes we've
changes.
discussed.
Okay, I'll take that as a motion by Lloyd.
have-
Do I
I'll
have-
support.
Okay, we have a motion by Lloyd, support by Stacy to send the solar energy ordinance with the mentioned changes to the township board for approval. Any further discussion? We get a roll call on this one.
Glenn Mitchell,
Yes?
Lloyd Curtis,
Yes.
Tony Ingber,
Yes.
Pat Feeney,
Yes.
Stacy Stecker.
Yes.
Thank you guys very much. Okay, moving on. Old business number 2, sign ordinance amendments. Mike?
All right, so I don't know if you want a copy of that too. Created a PowerPoint to help get us all on the same page for signs. I deal with this every day, right? So when I use these terms, I know what I'm saying, but I realize other people don't always. So I tried to get some visual representations of signs that are listed in the zoning ordinance today. And then we're going to go through quickly the Gilbert or Reed versus Gilbert, which is where we get this whole content neutrality, and then review some potential concepts for improvements to the zoning ordinance that deals with that content neutrality. So if we're looking at page 3, we show you different types of freestanding signs. Right? You have your ground sign, your pylon sign, your base-mounted ground sign, and then you have a double inside post ground sign, a center pole sign, and a post and panel ground sign. So the way all the ordinance reads today, pole signs are not allowed, so that removes the bottom layer, and then pylon signs. So those are ground-mounted signs that are just super tall. And those are also prohibited, specifically prohibited in the sign ordinance. So they are mentioned as prohibited signs. You also have prohibited signs because they're not mentioned, right? But that's a different thing that we'll talk about. So I guess the first question I have, I don't think anyone has any issues with ground signs, but do you still feel that the prohibiting pole signs and pylon signs is appropriate for the township?
I was going to ask, what's the real difference between pylon sign only is higher than this picture? Because basically it's the same as the ground sign, only it's narrow and perhaps higher. But
That's what would have been the original thinking on.
So again, right, you get back to that visual impact. The taller the signs.
but you already have height requirements, don't you? Or maximum height anyway, so.
Correct, and I believe it's like 6 feet. So, that really limits the height of a pole sign, right? So when communities do allow them, they would allow them at a taller height. We actually have issues another reason not to allow pylon signs is depending on where they're located, they can block
Well, so can ground signs and base mounted signs. That's my objection to them. The pole sign is the one that's least likely to block things. Especially driving in and out of driveways, being able to visibly see a pole sign is up in the air and gives a lot more visibility than the ground sign or base mounted.
I get the blocking, but I think also when you're prohibiting kind of the view you're seeing with the pole sign. I mean, you're not just taking in blocking. At least the way I'm looking at it with the signs, it's also what you're visualizing too. You could have 100, pole signs that aren't blocking anything, but if they're all lined up in a row, it's kind of gaudy looking. I think it could come from Royal Oak originally, and one of their biggest problems was you went down Woodward Avenue for a long time, and it was most of them, probably the vast majority, were pole signs, but it was just the numbers of them. The only thing I could say in Township at the moment, there probably wouldn't be an issue with that because we don't have any commercial strips where you'd have that many places. But looking for the future and thinking, I don't know if I'd want to see where if you could have a strip mall where you could have 3 or 4 pole signs in a row on. That would be, site-wise, it would be ugly, I think.
When you think of pylon signs, you got to think about Great Lakes Crossing down in Auburn Hills.
Mm-hmm.
They got them all the way around. I mean,
Mhm.
they are huge. I'm guessing we would limit from there, but they're pretty obtrusive.
Well, Genesis Hospital. I mean, it's nice, but that's a pretty big one there, and I'm thinking you get new development, and everybody would love to have a pylon sign like that, for their business and that.
So why, the character of the township, that would be the reason not to include those.
But in your commercial district, aren't you allowing that by nature? It's going to have signs, so.
But so what would be allowed currently is the monument signs. So on the next page is wall signs. It's pretty self-explanatory. Now, roof signs are prohibited again, right? Specifically mentioned in the ordinance. And again, I think that's more of a visual preference reason. It's something that a lot of communities prohibit, so it's not a common type of sign. So then on page 5, these are really the signs we're going to end up talking about today, right? These are other types of signs that are identified in the sign ordinance. So you have your political signs, your directional signs, your garage sale signs, historical markers, bulletin boards, and menu boards. One thing you'll notice is looking at all those, the way they're defined is based on what they say, which, as we're going to talk about, can't really do anymore. So regardless of if these signs are appropriate, we have to figure out ways to write the ordinance so that they meet the character and are consistent with the Supreme Court. So then on page 6, right, we have there's two types of real estate signs, construction signs allowed in the ordinance based on if it's commercial or residential, and then changeable copy signs. Now, 3 common types of signs that are not mentioned in the sign ordinance are your electronic message signs, banner signs, and inflatable signs. Now, I'll start with the inflatable signs first. You know, that again gets back to the character of the community. A lot of communities we work in do not want inflatable signs, and I made the mistake of removing it from an ordinance that I'm working on. And the first question I asked is, where are the inflatable signs? So, you know, it depends on the community as if those are appropriate or not. Some people like having the big gorilla, you know, out there,
Township.
or those little flappy guys, you know. So it's something that you probably talk about, you know, is that appropriate for Holly or not? Banner signs. So banner signs are not directly referenced in the sign ordinance, but there are community signs that can span a street or a road,
Yeah.
which essentially is a banner, but it doesn't say banner. But if someone wants to have a grand opening, you know, that may be something you want to consider, or it may not be. You know, again, some communities say no banner signs because if they're not attached properly, right, a gust of wind comes and they go flap it around, and the appearance of that is not it's not appropriate for the township. And then electronic message signs. You know, we've all driven all over the state and seen. We always remember the horrible examples, right? I mean, if you drive Dort Highway in Flint, you know, you can, you know, see those wonderful examples. But it is possible to have regulations that control that. But again, right, it gets back to the character of the township. Is an electronic message sign appropriate for commercial use?
Mike, real quick, what about the flag banner those kind of signs? You see them at car lots and.
So those are not mentioned in the sign ordinance. I think you know, some consider them banner type signs because again the material is similar. You know, so if banner signs or inflatable signs are something you guys want to consider, then we can present the rest of the gamut of those. But if they're not, then that's fine too.
So if they're not mentioned, they're prohibited.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So do you have any comments on banner signs?
So you said if they're not in here, they're prohibited, or the other way, they're not prohibited? I'm just
No, if they're not listed in the sign ordinance, they are prohibited because they're not allowed.
they're not allowed. Oh,
Sign ordinance only states what is allowed.
Right.
And it does have
Yes.
prohibited signs, but you know, again, it can't address all types.
I think in most ordinances saying what's not allowed, so I'm not used to them saying
Right.
I guess
only
I was
what's allowed.
thinking the banners. I was thinking about the way the village does it, but now that I think about it, when just something to keep in mind, a lot of churches and organizations put temporary banner signs out in front of their locations. That might be something you don't want to be sitting there saying, hey, you don't have to, you know.
Well, I always want people to remember that businesses have a hard enough time staying in business in the
Right.
first place.
Yeah.
And the more restrictive you are in these, this is the thing that gets their message out to people, that where they're at and how to be found.
Right.
And I know people use all kinds of other things nowadays, but it's still, if you don't have a decent sign, a lot of times it's real hard. And so I really hate seeing a lot of things prohibited when some of them just are minor issues because we don't like something. And not,
It's like the
not
inflatable
effective.
ones. My question is have you ever seen a sign ordinance where those are temporary ones?
Oh, definitely.
Because I was going to say, I'm looking at a lot of this, and legitimate businesses, some of them might keep it, but I think a lot of them, that would be, I'm looking at it, would be something they'd use to promote themselves, a sale, or you said grand opening, and I think that might be something to consider, having what you call temporary ones, just like you would on political ones, it's like you have a certain amount of time.
My recommendation would be there would be a time limit to how long they can be out there. They would have to pull a permit from you guys so you can track how long it's out there and make sure that it's removed at the appropriate time.
That'd be both for a banner or inflatable, right?
And that would be my
Because I think that's what the village, I think,
banners
does for
are
those.
temporary
Yeah.
Right.
in nature.
But right now they're not in here, so you can't do those things.
Well, that's
So
what
we
we're
have to
talking about. Right?
Yeah,
Is if
but
you-
Right. No, that's what I meant about having a
Yeah.
section for temporary ones.
and you're saying flag banners where they're like the feather flags that are right now, because they're not mentioned, they're not allowed in the township.
That is how I would, and
you mean
I don't know how you
Feather
go about
flags are,
enforcing it, but
shaped like feather, and
Oh, okay. It's like, why are we
they're
discussing?
like 6'8" foot tall.
Right,
usually.
yeah. Now I have it. I just, for some reason, I couldn't place it.
Those are very popular now because they are
Yeah.
visible and
Well, and I
take a lot
think
of
the
space.
electronic message signs
What were you saying, Amy? I'm
kept
sorry, I
low
didn't
to the
catch.
ground are
I believe
popular
that
too.
banners and flags are within our definitions, but not specifically within the sign ordinance verbiage. But I have enforced within definitions on 2 separate properties and 1 for flags as well.
That weren't covered by anything. Okay. Yeah, I think if you had a temporary one, I think that would help a great deal on it, And it'd be a minimal intrusive to business to say, hey, you just have to let us know when you have that, 100-foot gorilla out there, and put a time
I
limit.
believe that they are listed under the definition of temporary portable within our code ordinance.
okay.
In addition to time, there should be a limit on the number. Like
Oh,
these
yeah.
flags, they
Right.
can't have 100 of these things.
Right.
There's got to be
Or
some
100
reasonable
gorillas.
number. Yeah, or every
Get
one of
your
these
attention,
characters.
wouldn't it?
So, what about electronic message signs?
I think that they are what is the new age for signs.
As long as they're built in, not a trailer that pulls
Right.
in and parks,
Right,
but they're
right.
actually built so they look nice. And
I think keeping them lower to the ground is important. When you start getting into the really tall ones, now you're talking about a lot of light and things along those lines.
And we
But
could-
Tony and Lloyd, you were the two that were on about the one at the Shell station out on 75 there. What was the background on that? Did we have rules covering or anything
So
covering that?
the billboard section does allow those billboards because it's consistent with the state highway.
Is that how that one fell? Okay, so
Right.
that's, but if we had other regulations on electronic ones, that wouldn't be affected?
Correct.
Okay, so in other words, because it's on the highway, okay, so that's.
So we can control how bright they are, how often they
Okay.
flash, or if they're allowed to flash, how often the sign changes.
That would be my worry, that
And
that
so,
one would be
from the sign industry themselves, part of their recommended model ordinance includes requiring a dimmer switch.
Right.
This is from the sign industry themselves, right? Because it has to be brighter during the day, because you have to deal with daylight.
Right.
Does not have to be as the
Right.
consistent
Right.
brightness, 24 hours, because as it gets darker, it doesn't need to be as bright. So having that requirement of the dimmer switch helps address the glare issues that you have.
is that
Yeah,
on a
they
timer?
liquor store right up here in Saginaw that I don't think has a dimmer
I
switch.
agree.
Did you hit that at night? You're like,
No,
whoa.
I have been there very early in the morning, and it does not have a dimmer
Yeah,
switch.
so-
And the dimmer switch is a solar
Automatic.
switch or it's a
It's-
timer?
It's automatic, it's a sensor.
Because I went by the one at 75 in Grange Hall yesterday morning, and it was really, really bright.
Right.
So I don't know
if it
that
changed at
one-
the wrong time or
Well-
it was really bright.
So this would be a requirement that we would put into the zoning ordinance. It's not a requirement that the state has.
Right.
So
State considers it empty land, not bothering anybody, I guess that's the way I look at it.
Unless you're trying to get on the highway.
The one signs I don't like isn't the sign itself, but Genesis is a classic one where they have really bright lights that shine onto the sign. And it's not the ones on Holly Road, but if you're actually on their property, sometimes those lights don't shine directly on the sign. They're very blinding. I really
Yeah.
dislike those. And for a while, the one subdivision next to, I can't think, off of North Holly Road, right next to Baptist Church there. Their sign, Mill Point, yeah.
Mill Point.
Now I don't think it is now, but for a while that shone right into the road kind of vision. But And I don't know what you call that or how you regulate that, but I think those are antique signs now, because most people aren't using those really bright lights and shining on the signs. But that's the part I find distracting, because they can flash in your eyes and see that. But I don't know how that's probably just under brightness anyway or something.
Yeah, I know that there is lighting restrictions in here, but you know, we can definitely make sure that that's addressed.
But I think we should be flexible on signs. I think it's a business is trying to do what's right. They don't want something that looks bad either. And sometimes they know better what is safer and better than the sign ordinance does. I think we're trying to do it for safety reasons.
And I think that the electronic message sign is important now to
I think you're going to have a hard time not to have that.
right, because it's just it's your most bang for your buck. Yeah, so.
No. Oh no, my only thought was, as I remember that one out there was a big question on it, and you guys were going around about it, and I just didn't want to be in a position that we have to follow what was done out there anywhere else.
Right.
You know.
So, are there any other signs? I think we're in consensus that we should explore making electronic message signs a permanent part. Are there any of these other sign types that you guys would want to make permanent? Then we can discuss temporary.
What's the idea on number 4, the mansard roof one? Because I always thought that was an attractive way that wasn't obtrusive to other things. It's just part of your roof almost.
Where are you looking?
Number 4,
On
top
page
right.
4.
Oh,
The prohibited one there.
I think like as an example, like in the downtown
Aesthetics.
historic area, it's going to take away from the aesthetics.
Yeah, but that's the village. We don't have control of
Right,
that.
I'm just saying, that's what I would think would be, I wasn't a part of the prohibiting,
I
but
just-
I would think that would be it.
It just seems like that's not in the way. It's not going to be, for people driving out of driveways. It is a thing right above the business usually. Seems like that would be a permitted use of any, I'm just so surprised that was prohibited, I guess.
Well, I would think that the projection sign would be as much of a eyesore as the roof sign would be as well, so if you're going to allow the projection.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I thought those hanging off
Yeah.
the building aren't exactly more attractive. I guess I think too, aging-wise too, how will something look a couple years down the line? All signs look great when you first put them up, unless you just don't like the sign.
Or like the business.
But how's it going to look in a couple of years? Are you going to have, especially the ones hanging off the building? You got to get that, weathered look to it. And the other thing is too, the business changes. You're going to have another business in there that doesn't use the sign. That's something too.
They usually very quickly change it because they don't like people coming in
Asking
for something
for-
else.
But I mean, if you had a building that wasn't, that had a good size sign, and you had a company, it's like, I don't need a sign. I'm not advertising to anybody, but I think that's a kind of more of aesthetics than for so much of a.
Now,
What
sorry.
about the party store and gas station that has every square inch of the wall and window covered with beer signs and cigarette signs and everything you can think of? Every color you can imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, all the way around the building.
To get your attention.
Yeah. But is it ugly or what?
Well, I know a lot of the banner signs on like the party stores, that's actually done by the distributor, and they come in and change those after a certain period of time. And then I would ask, also, if we're going to, at this point with the roof sign and the projection, if we allowed the electronic message,
Yeah.
do we need to take into consideration that now you're talking about the electronic high up as well? So
you're
it's
talking
just-
about putting an electronic sign on the roof?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just
that would
something
be
to
my
take
kind of
into consideration.
Aesthetic-wise, it's like be advertising for the business, but you want something glaring from the rooftop. That's,
So I guess
all the
my
time.
my recommendation is that it would either be monument sign or a wall sign, right, and then not a roof sign. If that's the direction you want to go.
Right.
It's easier to take a sign off a wall than it is the roof.
But if you look at a
Yeah,
shopping
I
center,
guess
that's how
when I
that's
see
how
it,
they
when
sign
I
it.
talk about
Well,
it.
and that's
If we
fine.
were like in like Troy or someplace like that, I'm thinking, okay, roof sign gives someone I guess I just don't foresee ourselves. Maybe I'm not visionary here, but I don't see ourselves where someone would need to put it on the roof to identify themselves. 'Cause
I don't think it's going to be used very much, but just as a. The thing I have trouble with, if I try and business, now we have GPS for most things, but a lot of times you get to some of those places in Troy and these little tiny signs, and there's
Right.
all that traffic and that, And I know
Yeah.
you don't want a million signs up there, but boy, is it hard to find some things sometimes. And that's a problem for businesses if you can't find the location. So I have sympathy for businesses. For that.
I have left because I cannot find a business.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'll
Yeah.
go somewhere else.
I did have
So-
a question on monument size. What size are we looking? Is that something we could determine, or is that something that would be the ordinance could say it could only be so big? Because that I do have an issue with, because you go down the Heartland, trying to find, well, it's no longer there, but trying to find where the Walmart sign was. You'll drive right by it.
Oh, yeah.
Now I worked at the Walmarts in front for 3 years, and wow, it took me a couple of years before. Oh, we do have a sign here. I never saw it. You know, granted, I know it's Walmart's there. Everybody knows that, but there's other businesses you might not know.
All
And,
those ones in
some-
those plazas have a hard time because
Yeah.
they get lost with all
Right.
the other things that are
Or
there.
they'll
But I
put
think-
6 small signs on one big
Yeah.
one.
Right, you know, I didn't know, is there, you know, if a business came in and could show, reasonably show to us, it's like, well, I need something a little bit bigger because of my location, because of the topography of the, you know, the property, that, you know, I need something, you know, that sign's just not gonna do it. Like the sign out in Heartland, like you guys said, it got lost, you know, and I'm like, oh, there's a sign, you know, well, it's closed, nobody knows it, knew it was there, you know?
So what is our flexibility?
All right, well, let's start with what you guys allow right now, right? And then we'll go on to options. So your C1 and C2 districts for freestanding signs, you allow a maximum height of 6 feet and then 50 square feet,
Okay, so that's.
right? And then for your OS, light industrial and general industrial, 6 feet, 30 square feet. And then if it's a in the residential zoning district, 5 feet, 20 square feet. So it brings back to your question. Well, if someone can show their need, there's
There's flexibility.
right now today, right? You can apply for a variance. If you need a larger sign, if you can show justification, you can do that.
So instead of trying to guess all different sizes, you just say, go with the variance, say someone.
So I think, right,
Right.
that especially if it's part of a site plan, the correct person to review it is you guys, the planning commission. It's part of the development. You know, because this way you can see how it fits in with the whole site. Once you start using the zoning board of appeals, you know, really, you're not supposed to be approving all of the cases that you see in the zoning board of appeals. And there are a lot of applications that make sense. But making sense isn't one of the standards for the zoning board of appeals, right? It's unique, it's not applicable to anyone else, you know, it's not self-created, you know, so you have the 5 standards. If we set up something with the planning commission, you would have that flexibility, right? And you get people thinking about it during the development phase. Or, you know, for an existing, it just may be that signs are totally dealt with the planning commission, as opposed to, you know, just cut out the zoning board. Because then you have more flexibility.
Would that be something, Glenn, when you're looking at it, if you gave some, said, hey, look, you know,
Well, the other thing,
to go to the planning commission to,
the only thing I look at is every time you do a variance, it costs you money and time to go
Right,
through that whole
right.
process. Where if it's allowed to begin with, you
Yeah.
don't have to go through that process. So I like being flexible, but I know you have to have certain things, or else this will become unmanageable. So I know there needs to be some
Right.
rules involved and sizes and that.
yeah, I guess then you would say not to limit, but to have just kind of leave it up to when you're going.
Well, if they come before us as part of the site plan, would they actually be applying for? They still would not be applying for a variance at that point. It would just be
We
coming to
decided
us.
that
Now,
was-
if we said no, then they could still appeal it to the zoning board of appeals
Correct.
if they didn't like what we told them. But it
Right.
wouldn't be an additional cost to them to say, hey, we need an extra 5 feet in the air, or we need.
Yeah, like-
I know, Mike, with the
again-
flexibility, because someone comes in front of us, it's like, I can prove to you that that's going
This
to be
makes
ridiculous
sense.
to waste my money on that
You know,
side.
you know, your most recent example, again, right? Shannon, they got a variance for their sign. The sign fits their building, right?
Yes.
Right, yeah,
That sign fits, it works.
Yeah.
right.
Technically,
It's-
should they have gotten a variance? You know, but it works. And so, you know, where do you write that line?
Right.
They could have done that as part of the site plan review, not have to have this additional step. You guys could have said, this fits this building in this location, it's good.
So, could I understand this? If you do a site plan and you have a sign that really isn't allowed under ordinance, you don't have to do the variance if we allow it in the site plan?
That's what I would recommend.
Yeah. Now, and if we say no,
Then
they could go and they would have an appeal process. So it would be no additional cost to them as far as to come before us, other than the application to come before us, which they have to do anyway.
And Mike's got a perfect example. Like I said, it
Yeah.
fits. So you know, if we're looking at it, since it fits, there's no.
But
question
unfortunately,
about
the way that it is now, they had to go and do a variance, whereas what he's suggesting, that we could have handled that ourselves.
It's a site plan stage.
it.
Okay.
Saving money.
And so you still have standards to look at, right? So you're not just making it up as you go along. Because again, that can get you in trouble if you do that too. But it at least provides flexibility for you guys to look at something and make a judgment decision that really the zoning board shouldn't be doing.
I'm with
I like
Stacy
that.
with the electronic. I think that should be definitely kept in.
So when we talk about that, some communities limit it to like 50% of the monument sign. Others just allow the whole monument sign to be considered part of the electronic messaging sign. Do you have a preference?
Allow it as part of the monument sign, I think. 'Cause
Yeah.
I don't know why you make it more complicated.
Yeah, simplify it as much as possible.
And what's really distracting, you get a sign like this that's too small, where you can't read the things, then I think it's more distracting for people than having it decent size. And
My concern with electronic signs is always the brightness, the flashing, and that sort of thing. That's, if we're going to regulate something, that's where I would be concerned with regulating, not.
And and I think the sign
Percentage.
industry understands that too,
Yeah.
right? Because when communities were banning them, they're like, well, we want to sell this expensive sign to people. What can we do?
Right.
Right.
So that's why they're recommending, the dimmer switch, the brightness levels, and then, not continuous movement,
Oh, I got trying to read this. Okay, slow
Yeah.
down. I got to read that.
Right.
Yeah, that's-
let's just
so-
stop and look at it.
Right.
So, 15 seconds doesn't sound like a lot of time, but
It is.
in reality it is
Yes.
when you're driving by, right? And
Right.
You don't even see it move then. That also helps address issues with those that put temperature and time on there, right? Because as long as it can change at least once a minute, the clock isn't an issue anymore. What a lot of communities had previously was time and temperature regulations. If it's just, you could have a time and temperature change, but now, as we're going to discuss, that's not something that we can put in the ordinance. But if you talk about, a message can change once every 15 seconds, it resolves itself. All right, so maybe now we'll go through Reed and Gilbert a little bit. And there's a lot of writing here. You can take this home and really.
Well,
Dig
one
into
quick question is, what do we want to do about temporary sign permits? We were talking about for the gorillas and those sorts of things.
Can you
I think
come
it's
up
a
with
good idea.
language for us on that? Is there?
Yeah. So So I think we talk about it a little bit more further in here, but my thought is that for you would have them for a period of like 10 days, right? Pull a permit, and then the cost of permit is just more administrative, so it's not. When I was in Grand Blanc, we had a $15 permit, right? Enough to go out, check that it was taken down on the date that they said they were going to.
Would that be per sign, or if somebody is going to put? And then we have to talk about how many signs how many of these things they could put up, and
Well, 10 days isn't very long.
No, it's
No.
it's not.
Mine is 14, 4 times per calendar year.
Okay.
and that's what our current ordinance is. Is there a limit to how many signs they can put up?
I believe it's just one off premises.
So that's pretty consistent with what other communities do. Again, right? It's temporary. How long is your sale going to be?
That's true. Too.
Right? You don't, unless you're having your 100% of the time blowout closing, store sale where they never actually close. 2 weeks. That is, a pretty generous time for sales. And it reinforces that they're temporary, because once you start going over 2 weeks, that's when
Right.
it has the potential to start, decreasing in appearance, right, as it gets weathered and wind and rain
Right.
and life. So, so 2 weeks, right? That's pretty consistent with what other communities do.
Now, do we have anything about it being properly affixed to the structure? Because these banner signs are loud when
Mhm.
they're flapping in the winds. They can be very loud.
Got to be anchored properly.
Yeah.
So
securely.
I don't know if it's specifically in there, but it will be, right?
Okay.
Because now that you said you want to allow banners, I have language that I can throw in there
Okay.
that we've used in other communities.
Okay.
Do we want to allow inflatables too?
Sure.
I think that's,
For
Yeah.
limited time.
yeah.
The
Definitely
gorilla
not
can
2
stay
week.
for 14 days.
Yeah.
Then he's got to go.
Right, and then you limit the size of the.
That was actually my next question. Size and location as far as right of way and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it would not be allowed in the right of way, right? And then you would have to be able to maintain clear vision views for the drives, right? So that would affect the setbacks.
It's kind of
I
nice to
can-
think of a spot right now. I can't think of many businesses in the township that would have any real humongous inflatable ones. They're still kind of,
Well, I could think of the
Cars.
balloon place.
right. But they
Right.
could actually be operating their regular business and put up a balloon.
That's true,
You
too.
know? I thought of that too. And I thought, well,
I
that's
think
probably
what
what
you would
they
most
do.
likely see is those little flapping
Yeah.
Mhm.
things.
Yeah,
right?
right. That was the only thing I was
Yeah.
thinking of.
But I can give you some examples of how other communities regulate them, and then you can see what works best.
One other quick question. Do we, I mean, it's more in the village and the township, but I was always thinking ahead. What do we have as far as these people standing on the corner of the road? I happen to think it's not good. I think you're distracting drivers because they are standing in the right of
Reed
way.
and
and-
Gilbert covered that.
Actually, no,
Oh.
which is actually one of the outstanding issues which is why you don't see a picture of that in here. I don't have an answer for you either way.
Can we prohibit it? Do we want to prohibit it? Do we want to allow it? I mean, can we prohibit it?
So
I mean, now you're talking. What about the people standing on the road
So-
collecting money?
So here's my
And
answer.
they
right?
have signs.
Communities do. It hasn't made it through the Supreme Court yet.
Big great.
I don't. It is, and the sign industries themselves say they don't know how it's going to play out. If you do want to consider it, you can limit the locations where they can do it. Outside of the right of way, again, away from your vision, clear vision for accessing the drives.
But if it's not in here, it's not allowed, right?
I said I don't
And
see it
they're-
being a
aren't they
problem right
becoming
now. but-
dated too. That's not
I tend to
something I'm
want to
seeing
probably
a lot
stay
anymore.
away
It
from
just-
it because
yeah,
it's not
I-
just-
you
they
just
don't
don't
wanna be
see them
couple years.
anymore. Yeah.
At Grange Hall and Saginaw, you had competing pizza.
Yeah, for years, and that hasn't been
Yeah, I
for the last 2
haven't
years.
You haven't
seen
seen them
them
this person?
around
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see.
very
Tax
often
season,
anymore.
I'm sure will.
Liberty.
Yeah.
That's,
Did
Oh
they
yeah,
not-
the
Yeah.
lady.
So was that the
Liberty.
local communities that rescinded their order about having people out there collecting money at
Some
intersections?
have.
Yeah, that wasn't a court ruling. That was the local communities. I think there wasn't any. But
Yes.
would that be?
that was a different situation.
That would not be covered under any kind because they're not per se advertising anything. They're just out there for a particular group.
Right.
Okay.
We have a soliciting permit requirement within the township. as well.
Township.
Mhm.
We just don't have an intersection I think would be particularly safe for
Well,
any-
I know, and
Yeah,
that's
it's
the only
like-
one I could think of currently would be with the Grange Hall Fish Lake
Yeah.
Road.
Yeah.
Right.
And that would be on the northeast side if you say the liberty tax was to go into that strip mall. But
Right.
even then, I think that they would be on somebody's
Property,
commercial property.
right.
Someone's property.
That's the biggest thing is that some of this I'm trying to picture. I guess we got to think ahead because
That's-
I don't see a lot of this like the balloon, the gorilla sign. I just don't see a lot of businesses actually in the township using it. But
Come on, Glenn will
The
have,
future.
Glenn will have a parade of them.
Careful, let's talk about it like that.
Well, the only thing was, I was going to say, Tony, about the people with the signs with the commercial ones on it is, right now, I have yet to see anybody be too political with them. But I'd be afraid if you put down some ordinance that you might just be throwing down the red flag for someone to challenge you on it. Because right now, most people say Little Caesars, you know, your local, that's not really that bothersome. But I think if you put something down restrictive, you're going to get someone out there, just like with the gun rights, they're going to come out. You're going to get the ones that are going to take it to the extreme. They're going to want to come out and prove their point to you. And I don't know.
No, my
You know,
thinking.
if we were having an issue within the township, I'd say that'd be something we look at now. But
No, my thinking was either can we say we just don't allow people to do that, period, or because obviously, like you said, we can't regulate. Once we say they can do it, we can't necessarily regulate what they put on the
Right,
sign.
that's-
So we can
that's
say
true.
we don't want.
No, I guess that's true. If we say we don't want it, then it's,
You can, so communities do say that.
Has it
I don't know if
worked?
I don't have a professional recommendation. How about that? From a personal standpoint, you know, I don't know that you don't have the commercial district where
Right.
that is likely to happen, or the character where it's appropriate.
Right.
But if we have an influx, we can always come back.
Yeah.
Right. That's true.
Right, and because those are temporary, right? You can shut those guys down because they go home at night.
Yeah.
Right, they're not just out there 24 hours, you know, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
They have to go home at some point, use the bathroom, whatever.
Okay.
All right. So the next couple pages talk about Reed versus Gilbert. On page 9, you see this little snipe sign here? This is what started everything. That little sign right there. The city told him he couldn't have that sign, and this went all the way to the Supreme Court and got us our decision that we can't regulate based on content. So, 9 and 10, just give you a little bit of background. 11 is, Chief Justice, or Justice Thomas, right, wrote that if you need to read the message on a sign to determine how that sign is regulated, the ordinance is content-based. And so, we can't do that. And if we look at page 13, right, Thomas outlined what municipalities can regulate. So size, materials, lighting, moving parts, portability, postings on public property. And then there's some that he identified might be able to survive scrutiny of content neutrality. So warning signs, signs directing traffic, and street numbers associated with private houses. So those that deal with health, safety, and welfare, you can put some content restrictions on that. Now, there was an additional opinion that kind of expanded some of those thoughts as to what municipalities can regulate. So size, the locations in which signs can be placed, lighted versus unlighted, signs with fixed message versus electronic message that change, placement of signs on private versus public property, placement of signs on commercial versus residential property, on-premise versus off-premise signs, total number of signs allowed per mile of roadway, time restrictions on signs, advertising a one-time event, and governmental speech. So again, health, safety, welfare. And it's usually this list that you'll see communities working off of, so it's a little bit more expansive. So we have some examples of existing types of signs that are listed in the zoning ordinance and what are some options for dealing with them. So when you look at political signs, right, you know, your typical content-based regulation is political signs advertise candidates or proposals on a ballot. It may not be placed more than 30 days prior to the election or 7 days after the election. Well, if you remember, we talked about this probably 2 months ago. We've identified these types of signs as just yard signs, right, and limit the number of yard signs you can have of a size without restriction on how long they can be out. And so that takes away the content of the sign, allows you to have your free speech sign or your garage sale sign, your sale sign. Then temporary directional signs. you know, again, right, this was based off of. Signs advertising temporary off-site event and permitted 24 hours before and 12 hours after a sign. The ways to regulate that is, again, considering these yard signs and not look at the content on them, have a maximum number of yard signs you can have, maximum height and size of those signs, and minimum setbacks. And then have removal of those signs based on the condition of the sign, right? So you want to make sure the signs are being well maintained. If they become, you know, if they're using your snipe signs that are essentially paper, right, as they become worn, they no longer are in good maintenance, and you can require them to be removed there. Then, but you're not requiring it based on the message. And you know, again, right, that's sort of how we were proposed it to begin with, you know, 2 months ago.
Mike, real quick, you're talking, this is all private property here. I mean, people stick their political signs at the street corners and the right-of-way.
So, the road commission doesn't allow you to put signs in the right of way. So,
You do too, okay. Okay.
so those are not allowed either, because that's looking at the so the question is those people that post them on telephone poles,
Yeah.
right? The ordinance says those are not allowed. You're basing it based on the location of the sign, not what the sign says.
Okay.
So that was something that was going to be consistent throughout the new ordinance. So again, right, temporary directional signs, these are all. So if we go to page, I can't see the numbers because they're mixed in with the pictures. 22 and 23, permanent directional signs. So these help you get basically on site through properties, right? So you go into McDonald's, this helps you direct you to the drive-through. These are not necessarily signs you want to require permits for, but you still want regulations for it. And then so you again, you're limiting them to the size and location and the number that would be allowed on the property. So they are able to, if they want to put a picture of a hamburger on there, they can. But you know, due to the size of it, you know, it's not going to be effective advertising, right? So the intent is that these are going to be the directional signs that allow you to get around. Then, so one of the big ones is real estate signs. But again, right, we've already discussed how we're going to handle this as part of yard signs. So it's going to be the condition of the sign, the size of the sign, and the location of the sign. So in a residential district, this would be included with the number of yard signs that you're allowed to have. And because it's a durable material, it will last longer for the time frame that you have to sell your home. But we're not limiting it to, you know, a certain time frame. And so, you know, we're talking about temporary sale signs. Again, right, this gets us back to the banners and the inflatables, right? So the maximum number that you would have on a site, the removal standards, and then your time frame for how long you would be allow it to be up for. And then these are really repeating themselves. So if we skip down to the gasoline sale signs. So again, right, gasoline sale, that's pretty much content based. So you end up regulating it based on your changeable copy section, the electronic message sign. So they would have the option of using the existing language within the ordinance, but not limiting it to just, you know, gas stations.
Interesting part, Exxon sign there. Notice the part down below that they put a message.
Yeah.
Is that something that we can regulate with the ordinance saying that, okay, it's a gasoline sign, you can't advertise anything else other than what your business is doing?
No.
You can't. Okay.
No.
So in other words, what they have there would be considered okay.
Correct.
All right.
And so, you know, that's a consideration for allowing changeable copy,
Okay.
you know, but it's protected under free speech. So,
Right. Okay.
you know, used to be communities would regulate that, but
'Cause that's one I could see where people pointing out, especially.
Now, I don't see, I mean, I think I'm going to assume that people wouldn't do this, but you never know. Looking at that exact sign, do we have any recourse if somebody put foul language, racial language, homophobic, anything that is offensive.
That would be a question I would refer to your attorney.
Yeah.
And when you have a sign like this, people come and rearrange it sometimes
Yeah.
too. So sometimes it says something that
Well, yeah.
Then hopefully
Not
they
that I've
would
ever had that
rearrange it
experience.
again. If
So
they got an
there are
electronic sign,
obscenity
they'd be fine.
That is outside of the zoning ordinance. I wouldn't even want to lead you on a path that I can't confirm is correct or not.
Okay.
He's not touching that one.
So the next is, drive-through restaurants. So we get to the menu board. Those are still uses that are necessary, right? So you associate it with the land use and not what it says, right? So as opposed to saying drive-through restaurants, you say drive-through. So if a bank needs a message board, so be it. If a drive-through cleaners needs a message board, they can do it because it's part of the drive-through. Now, you guys, I believe, treat drive-throughs as special land use, so it's something that you can look at that point in time and take that in consideration of the whole site plan. But again, it's not to, we want to allow obvious uses, but how do we do it in a way that meets the intent of the content neutrality? And the last example on here is time and temperature, which we talked about. By allowing a reasonable amount of scroll on a sign, that will be addressed without specifically saying time and temperature. So that's sort of the background on signs. Now that we have some direction on these other types of signs, we're going to incorporate this into the draft ordinance for you guys to review. Still going to take a couple meetings to go through this, but we're moving forward on it. And you guys take this home. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is
very
really
helpful.
good.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions tonight?
Is there any sign, anything in our townships presently that you see would be an issue with signs? For me, I can't really say there's any particular sign.
Existing signs?
Yeah, existing that
You see. The one thing to consider is your minimum setback for monument signs.
Right.
It's based on your road right of way, 25 feet back,
Right.
which essentially, you're putting legally they're going to be like 50 feet off the road, right? And that's not really necessary, so reducing that setback, I think it would be appropriate, because again, you want to be able to see the sign, right? The further back it is off the road, it's just not doing anyone any good.
Right.
Yeah, the riding stable on the north end of town, I believe, that sign is technically non-conforming.
It is, and so was Woodfield South. So that, and because I had an active complaint on that, I had to ask them to remove that because it was literally in a piece of private property.
Right.
And that was because their setback was 33 feet from center. Then you add the additional 15 feet, and then you're in private property. Same with the Red Riding Hood stable. They would be in so far back that it would be almost
Right.
redundant.
Readability is it's so important on the signs because so many communities regulate it such that you can't read the sign, especially the speed limits in the township are higher, right? If you're traveling between 45 and 55 miles per hour, you need a sign a certain size to be able to see it in a safe manner. And a lot of communities don't.
If you want to hear extreme, at Telegraph and 10 Mile Road, there's a car wash just south of there. Gentleman I knew bought the building next door, tore the front half of the building down because they wouldn't give him a change on the sign, so he could move it out so someone could see it. So he had to buy the building next door, take part of the building down so he could see his sign.
That's how important signs are though, to businesses.
Well, right. Oh yeah.
If they would be able to afford that and to do that, it was because he wasn't being seen. That's the reason why he do that.
So if we change the way we do the ordinance, that we are going to be the ones that would be able to grant special permission to somebody because the Red Riding Hood stable sign makes perfect sense where it is. And I don't know if there's anything we could do retroactively to declare them that they are in compliance.
Once we amend the ordinance, that's one of the situations we're going to look at, right? And I believe they'll become in compliance once the ordinance is updated.
Okay. What did she say?
I'd also have to file for a permit.
Right.
Which is an important aspect of being in compliance.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Lloyd, anything?
Nope. So,
Anything?
So are we going to revise the setbacks? Is that something that we're going to
yeah,
look
you're
at?
going to look at them.
Okay, all right, yeah. That's it.
Glenn?
I think I've already voiced my concerns.
Yes.
So we'll take no action tonight
Right.
on this, and we'll again, this is great.
Yes.
This, I'm a big time visual aid person, so that's very helpful. Okay, moving on. New business, we have none. Reports. We'll start down there with Pat.
As I stated before, George and I went to the solar conference out in Ionia. It was mainly for farmers and getting information on waste, but we found out some good information, a lot like we're saying about vegetation, stuff like that, and it did kind of make you, you're talking about different land uses and that. Something that did kind of hit me when you're talking about the gravel pits. I was wondering, had you ever heard of any piece of property like that being used for solar? Because I thought, I realized about 2 years ago, I think I asked, I was at a board meeting, and I asked why they kept renewing permits for the gravel pits when these people weren't using them anymore. And they said, well, they're hoping for the business to come back or someone to come forward with the proposal for them. And I thought, geez, the light kind of went on. That would seem like a logical place if you could find, obviously, a flat enough spot in that. But it was interesting. What was nice about it is they actually had people from the solar industry, put that out, there speaking. And one gentleman that I spoke to said, if you have people talking to officials or they made it public that they're looking at property in your area, he says, they've been doing this for, he said, probably over a year. So that's usually the average time they take when they're looking for sites. And then he goes, and he says, it's not going to be small. He says, they're, right now with the way the rules have changed, they're only looking for big projects. We're past the experimental. They know it works. They know what they can do with it. And he said, and he just pulled out a map. He's from Chicago. He pulled out a map and said, oh yeah, I'm looking at, like Mike said with the transmission lines, he says, oh yeah, you're in a great spot for it. But he also brought up the point, he says, watch what you want to come in though, because he says, we've had communities where they've encouraged and said, we want to see the solar, not thinking that the old line power companies are going to need to come in and put equipment in. That's why I was asking Mike if we thought what he thought of our. He said we looked pretty good from what he could see from his information, the gentleman did. But it was very informing and kind of opened your eyes up. And I was surprised. He was the first one to point out to everybody in the room. He says, this idea, he says, that you're going to have solar running a whole city. He said, that's never going to happen. He says, but it's going to be part of a mixed bag. And he said, and he pointed out the Lapeer one. He says, look, he says, that's 287 acres, I think he said it was. And he says, that's 9,000 homes. He says, do the math. He says, at the present technology, he says, you're not going to have a city of 1 million people. He says, this is not happening right now. He said, so don't fear that. He says, you're not going to have anybody coming in. Everything, he says, is going to be pretty proportional. He says, and he thought, and he says, one thing he really stressed, and the MSU people stressed too, was, with the right use of the land, like you were saying with the native foliage and all that, he said they've had places where they've actually had honey production started where it had never been before because they were able to plant near the solar panels plants that attracted the bees and that. It was really interesting. I'd go to that. Sorry you couldn't. George and I both looked at each other and said, oh God, Tony would have loved it. It's his thing, so, but it was very good. On the wetland, or the woodlands one, we postponed the vote on it. The only reason why we postponed the vote on it was that we felt that Steve Root wanted to be there. He had a few questions, and there was, we thought we'd just wait till we had a full board for it. So that should come up at the next meeting to vote on that.
What date would that be?
What is that?
That would be April 18th.
Thank you. I was going to say the 21st, so. So that's about it for me.
Lloyd?
George and I went to the Shannon open house the day before St. Patrick's Day. They had a very nice Irish meal there for everybody. It was a huge crowd. A lot of their vendors and customers and people from the community were there. George and I both spoke to the group, and I thanked them for the work ethic that they have and the way they were easy to work with. And they showed plans of additional building and possibly 2 beyond that. That's why they've cleared that area to the south. People question why they cleared so much, but they have a plan in mind, and I think it's a good plan. The floors in the place were as clean as this top. You could eat off the floors. It was just really a nice facility, and the sign looks great. It does fit. I mean, it could be even a little bigger. That's a big building, but it looks good. You can read it, and it looks real nice. So it was very good open house that they had.
Nothing at this time.
Solar is interesting to me. The thing I think is long term is maintaining. To me, you can't let trees grow up in there, so you've got to mow. I just wonder how that's going to play out in Michigan. You know, when you're out west, a lot of that's like desert land, and it has a lot more sun, so it makes a lot more sense. Here, for a long-term thing, you have some kind of maintenance plan to actually keep the trees and stuff from. And there's nothing really you can do much. You can pasture sheep. Other than that, there aren't many things you can use that same ground for. That's my concern a little bit with how much acreage it takes up. Is you really don't have much other use for that property. You know, pollinating insects, I guess, but that doesn't seem to be.
It was funny because when I was asking about the configurations, that was one of the things that came up, and they were showing where farms that were still operating, and they really hadn't changed much. And one guy was doing soybeans, which surprised me. You know, that's where I was concerned about whether, you know, someone could get away with the stacking, because they had some of those that were really up there. But the one thing you were speaking about, the trees, I was thinking that was something I didn't hear brought up there, but then again, we were dealing mostly with established farms already, and that's probably not a real big issue with them, the trees, you know. But actually I was rather surprised to see how much farming was actually still being done on some pretty good sized projects. The gentleman was telling me, he says he's seen farms where these guys thought the solar thing was going to be the end of their farm, and they were debating back and forth, only to realize, well, you can have your farm. And one guy actually opened up more land with his farm because the way they configured it, because the solar company had to come in and level the ground, and this guy said, well, I never had the money to do what they did. He says it actually opened up more for him. That really surprised me, because I was under the same thing. I thought, well, geez, you know, this is going to cut out all this farmland. And these guys were chomping at the bits, or like, where do I sign up? You know.
The place I like to see on commercial buildings, that's a natural
Right,
use.
right.
It's not being used for anything, and it's
Right.
not necessarily doesn't make it look worse or anything like that.
Well, the one thing this gentleman was telling us too, he says, I don't know about your place, but he says, we're getting a lot of these stores that are closing, big stores that are closing, like Kmart. He says a couple over on the west side of the state, they've actually gotten solar farms in on their old parking lots. I said, geez, do you remember we had a big discussion about what to do with the parking
Concrete
lots?
jungle, right?
And I thought, well, geez, there's something I would have never thought of before either, so. Maybe Fenton has a solar farm in the future.
The whole new
MSU has
definition of urban
covered all
farming.
their parking structures.
Yeah,
with solar
we were
panels.
just up at their cattle barn, or whatever they call it.
Yeah, our ordinance wouldn't necessarily allow that, would it? With a special use, or well, height though we're talking.
But if it's on an existing structure,
Well, but that wouldn't have had an existing structure at MSU. Those are all built that way,
But
right?
15
I've not
feet,
seen them, but
15 feet. That's I suppose if you use some monster truck or car, you could
right? I
probably
mean, if someone had built a parking structure,
Put
right,
it
then
up.
it can be on top of the structure. Yeah. And variances are always available,
Yeah.
right? If you have someone who wants to do an active farm and they need a height, that is a legit justification for doing that. So there is a process where they can go through.
So you could stack it real high.
I love that idea. The parking lots are mammoth there because there's so many students. I thought that was I have not actually seen that yet.
Yeah, I
was
pulled up to
five.
one of their buildings for a 4-H show, and I'm like, what's with all the covers on the parking spots? And my daughter goes, oh, that's solar. And I go, wow, good idea. I never would have thought of that.
Generating like 5% of their energy need, and saving about $10 million a year.
Wow. And not using up other land either, because it's all land they already had
Right.
for parking, and that was really not usable for much else. So.
Good thinking.
All right, I got a couple of things. First, my obligatory question of each month: where are we with Renaissance Festival?
So we are working with Fire Authority to meet with them. We have not been able to all agree on a date to meet, but I anticipate within the next week or so.
You know, with the solar stuff, they clear cut all of that land for the parking lot that we didn't end up approving. It'd be kind of a cool place for them maybe to set up some solar panels to help power their festival. Now a couple of ventings that I must do. I've got a little complaint with our local post office, which I'd like on the record. The township mailed our packets out on March 27th, and for some reason it has taken them 5, 6, in some cases, members of this board have not received their packet, and to me there's no excuse for that. The public entrusts us to make sure that we come to these meetings prepared, and yes, email is sent out, but there is something to be said for a paper copy, and so I'd like something to be said to the postmaster or whoever's running the show over there that that's just kind of not acceptable. The other thing, the state has apparently told us that we cannot have an alternate member on this board, which is something I find extremely disappointing. First of all, because it's not written in the thing that we can't do something. And I have a bit of a problem with a state agency telling a municipality what it can and cannot do with an appointed board.
So who exactly said that?
Our supervisor told us that that's
Right.
why it was not on the.
But where did he hear that though? Was that MTA?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
So a statement, right? They have made similar statements to Lapeer Planning Commission, County Planning Commission, about the way how they set up their commission, and it was determined that the MTA was wrong. They're another advisory board, right, to municipalities. Having said that, you know, as I mentioned last time, it is unorthodox, right? It's not common. I don't know of any other communities that do so. I don't necessarily agree with the determination that it is not allowed. However, you know, I don't necessarily think that it's appropriate. Anyway, right? So take that as you will. They also, another community that I work in had a question regarding the Opens Meeting Act, and I don't believe they provided accurate information they were told that they needed to have a special meeting to set up to approve another meeting, and I think that there are, I don't know.
On a matter not concerning the planning commission, I called MTA to get an opinion on something, and they gave me an opinion, and it ends up the opinion wasn't worth much. Okay, I'm just going to be honest with you. It was kind of like I took it as after the fact. I took it as well. That was their opinion, and it was like, and to be honest with you, it was like it agreed with mine, which didn't help me because that's not what I was looking for, and they were incorrect. So I mean, I said, and it's one of those things now. The gentleman also did say to me at the time, he says, well, if you have any doubts about it, he says, I'm sure there's a law, you can find the law somewhere. And I said, well, it's probably what I should have done but I was thinking they sell themselves, and the thing I think sometimes we get caught up with, they sell themselves as their resource. So you don't have to go to your attorney, but you got to remember they're selling a product. Sure. So they're kind of going to be selling, they're going to give you the best face forward that they can. They were nice. They've been helpful on other things with me, but like I said, I did get an opinion that was just totally off. It was like, yeah, that doesn't work.
Well, at the end of the day, my position when I heard that is that whether we would have decided to do it or not, regardless, I think any municipality should have the the right to decide, not an elected board, but on an appointed board, whether or not they want to have an alternate, because at the end of the day, the public is best served by having a seated board, a full seated board when possible. And I don't think an outside agency should be telling a municipality that they can't do that, take steps to do that. So, other than that, guys, I would like to say very, very pleased with the meeting tonight. As always, some great discussion, and I am proud of the work we have done. So, with that, we'll move on to the second public comment. If there's anybody who has anything they'd like to talk about. No? Okay, hearing none, we will adjourn the meeting at 8:26 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Feel free to turn the cameras off.